Well, good morning, everybody. How you guys doing today? Good to have you here. Loving the cooler weather. Feels like fall, right? Kind of coming. So that's great. Well, we are glad you're with us today as is our last kind of message in the series we've been doing called Flip the Script. It's a series which has been kind of contrasting life in our culture with the life that Jesus offers. And his way, of course, we've been saying is infinitely better than anything this world has to offer. We talk about all kinds of things from living with fullness in a world that's empty, or living in kind of ways that we belong rather than feeling lonely, or gracious in a world that's often angry and unforgiving. Today, I want to wrap up the series by talking about being faith-filled and therefore peaceful in a fearful world. Get us going with some stats and stuff. Sociologist named Barry Glassner wrote a book a few years ago called The Culture of Fear. And he said that we're the most fearful society in human history. One example he gave is while life expectancy has more than doubled in the last 100 years, last century, there's more cures to diseases than ever before in human history. No other group of human beings has lived healthier or lived longer, and yet no group of people has ever been as fearful about their health. Isn't that interesting? It's not in correlation to how we're doing. We're doing great in that sense. Like there's more medicine, right? People are living longer. There's all kinds of great things, and yet we've doubled in the amount of fear we feel about that kind of things. And I read another study recently that was looking at fear and finances, and they said the average American worries and is stressed and anxious and fearful about their finances. We spend about 5,000 plus hours in our lifetime stewing over finances in a world. That equates to 8 months of our lives, right? 8 months solid that we spend worrying and anxious and kind of just unsettled about our finances. It comes out to 8 to 10 hours extra a month. Could you use an extra 8 hours in your life? Well, that's how much on average we spend worrying and stressing about finances. We fear all kinds of things. I was thinking this week about just the way it tends to work. This time of year, it's getting colder. I start thinking about snow and start thinking about winter that's coming, all that kind of stuff. And I was thinking, how many times during an average year do the weather people get us all wound up about a potential snowstorm? They'll start out like 10 days early, and it'll be like snowstorm Helen, or whatever is coming, and it's going to be horrible. And they'll start using terms like this could be 100-year snowstorm, like it could be the worst that we've experienced. And like it gets closer, and you're inside a week now, and they're saying, oh man, you could have accumulations of 12 to 36 inches, right? It's going to shut things down. And often there's usually once or twice during the year that it's enough that people will go to the store and they'll stock up, right? They'll make sure they've got toilet paper until Jesus comes back, or whatever, the groceries and all. We go and we take action, and we're like, oh my gosh, it's going to go. How many times during the year do we get all wound up and we're all flustered and we're all upset, and the snowstorm misses us entirely, right? That happens at least once or twice a season. Or maybe we end up with half an inch or a quarter of an inch of snow on the ground. You're like, is that it? Like, is that what all the hype's about? But this happens, especially, I'm thinking, we feel it in weather where they kind of get us all stirred up and anxious and angry and upset, but it happens in all kinds of things. I was thinking politics this week. This is how politicians get elected, right? It's their strategy. Both sides use it. You can see it. They get us all stirred up. They fixate on their opponent, and they spend hundreds of millions of dollars trying to convince you and make you feel that if their opponent gets elected, it's going to be the end of the world as we know it, right? They tell you stories, and they give you stats, and they paint pictures, and they even show pictures of them looking like the most horrible a human can look, right? Kind of thing. They'll find the worst picture ever taken of this person, and they'll put it up before you again and again. They'll show video footage of this person, stealing from children or whatever there is to do, and they'll say, oh, this is going to be so bad for us. The economy's going to tank, our culture and civilization is going to go to pot. It's going to be horrible if this happens. And if they can get us anxious and upset enough, if they can make us fearful enough, it works. It's way more likely that we'll actually show up and we'll vote for them as opposed to their opponent. And then the other side does it, does the exact same thing. But it's driven. They're masters, and the media does this all the time. They're masters at stirring up fear in us, and it impacts how we live. It impacts, obviously I've mentioned weather, I've mentioned politics, but it's all kinds of things. How much of our lives do we spend wrestling with fear about the economy or the stock market or losing our jobs or health stuff? Have you ever gotten yourself gone down the rabbit hole of saying, man, I'm not feeling that great, and you decided to Google your symptoms? Have you ever done that? And pretty soon you're on WebMD and you're reading articles. You're like, I'm pretty sure I've got a plague of some kind, or they're going to have to amputate my whole body or something, because it's like I'm dying for sure, and you're like, I have like sniffles or something. Like, yeah. It's great at that. Like the algorithms lead us in certain places, and we get all stirred up, and we start imagining and fixating on the worst, and the problems get bigger and bigger and bigger, and pretty soon you're like, what's wrong with me? What is going on? We do it about health stuff, right? We fear all kinds of things, and it impacts our very lives. Max Lucado's got a great quote. I thought this was awesome and dead on. He says this. He says, fear and worry don't want you to make the journey to the mountains. If they can rattle you enough, they'll persuade you to take your eyes off the peaks and settle for a dull existence in the flatlands. Fear has the power to rob you of your life, the kind of life in freedom and faith and joy that we are meant to experience. Because of that, God wants you and I to know that we don't have to live in fear. We don't have to be paralyzed by fear. Well, I've been reading through the Bible this year chronologically, and I have to say, after spending like 9 months in the Old Testament, and I love the Old Testament, but after spending 9 months or so in the Old Testament and going through the minor prophets and the major prophets, and it's like gloom and doom, and you're like, oh my goodness, like come on. I finally got to the New Testament. I wanted to throw a parade and like have a party, but I got to the New Testament, so we've been reading through the Gospels, and the way it works is they go through it in kind of what they think is historical order. And so you'll read, out of, like right now I'm reading out of all 4 Gospels, it'll give you the same kind of picture of what's happening, and you kind of walk through all of them and read. It's a fascinating way to go through the Bible. But one of the things that struck me this week, and I'm going to, especially on this topic, as we're talking about fear and faith and all that kind of stuff, is there's actually 3, you can make a case for another one, but there's 3 kind of main passages in the Gospels, the biographies about Jesus, where Jesus has significant interactions with his followers in a boat. And so I'm actually going to zero in on one of them, but we'll reference all 3, because I think there's just some amazing imagery and some things that we'll relate to, and some things that we can learn. We're going to start in Mark chapter 4, but in each of these, I think there's some things we can learn about fear, but more importantly, about how to combat fear and how to live by faith and in peace, so to speak, in our own lives as we trust and follow Jesus. Mark chapter 4 is where we're going to start, starting with verse 35. And I'm going to read a section, and we'll talk. I'll read a little bit more, and we'll kind of go from there. It says this. That day when evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let's go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with them. And then a furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" I'm going to stop there for a second, because I love the contrast that we see here. First of all, the disciples are freaking out. Is that a fair thing to say? They're totally freaking out. They're like, we're going to die, right? We're going to drown. This is going to be bad, very bad. They are fearful. And the contrast, You see Jesus that's asleep in the boat. He's sleeping on a cushion, it says. Now, the disciples' conclusion when they see that is they think, well, he must not care. He must not care what happens to him. Maybe he's indifferent or unaware and maybe indifferent towards their pain or their fear or their circumstances. Now, I think it's interesting because I think sometimes we can come to the same conclusion. If other people don't freak out with our freaking out, if they're not upset and fearful about the same things we're fearful of, or even if we don't see God come through in the way we think he should in the midst of our storms and in the midst of our fear, we can sometimes think the same thing. Maybe God doesn't care. Maybe they don't care. Maybe they're indifferent towards our pain or towards our suffering. Now, in the minds of the disciples, I mean, they kind of know how this plays out, or they think it does, right? A bunch of them are fishermen. They've grown up on the water, and this squall, it says, this storm is bad. Waves that are maybe 10 or 15, who knows, maybe 20 feet high or more. Maybe this is a 100-year storm, so to speak. And their boat is swamping. The waves are crashing in over them, and they are afraid. And they think, we know how this plays out. The boat is swamping. We're going to drown. We're going down, and there's no one and nothing that can stop it. And so they're just panicking. And in their panic, they quit thinking, right? In their panic, they freak out. And in their panic, their fears multiply and magnify, and their faith and their trust in God is minimized. That's what happens when we're afraid. When we're afraid, we tend to fixate on the problem, and those fears and those problems get bigger and bigger, and our confidence in God grows smaller and smaller. It's so easy for us just to forget about who is in our boat. We forget what he's done in the past, and we act as though it's all up to us, and we know that we can't calm the storm. We know that we can't walk on water. We know that we are not up for the task. There's an author named Susan Jeffers who makes this claim. She says, the ultimate fear, right, underneath all the others, the ultimate fear is a loss of control, a fear that I can't handle or take on something in my life. She's basically saying that the ultimate fear is that we can't control the circumstances around us. Something bad could happen to me or to someone I love, and there's nothing that I could do to stop it. That, she says, is the ultimate fear. I don't know if you've ever had dreams like this, but I can remember having dreams just like that as a kid. I can remember in a dream, like a nightmare kind of thing, like somebody's coming after me. And I can remember I escaped from the house. I had the same dream over and over. Right? I'd escape from the house. I'd start running across our front yard. And every time it was the same. I would trip and fall down. And they were still, and you can't see them, but you kind of know they're coming after you. And as they get closer and closer, I go to scream, and what happens? You can't, right? Nothing happens. Nothing. I go to get up in my dream to run away, and what happens? I can't. That's, according to Susan Jeffers, that's our ultimate fear. It's underneath all the other fears is that I'm not going to be up to the challenge. The challenges are going to be bigger than I am, and there's nothing I can do to stop it. The reality is, though, that's actually true in our lives sometimes. Right? There are moments where we can see it and experience it. So much of our life is actually beyond our control. There's some things we can have control over, but it's less than we think. So much of life is beyond our control. When we're born, right? The socioeconomic realities that we are born into. The educational opportunities we have, therefore, how and when we die, sometimes just our health in general, some of our financial reality. So much of these things is beyond our control, and it's foolish for us to believe that our stability and peace and life inevitably come from our ability to control everything in our situation and our sphere. If that's where our hope and our faith rests, is on us being in control, let me just tell you this, we will be overwhelmed. We'll be stressed. We'll be anxious. We will live in fear, and we'll be paralyzed for so much of our lives. Back to our story. As the disciples are freaking out and their worst fears of being powerless is realized, there's somebody else in the boat, sleeping peacefully on a cushion. Let's go on. Verse 39 says this. It says he, Jesus, right? They come to him and like, don't you care if we drown? Like, Jesus, come on. And so he gets up, Jesus gets up, He rebuked the wind and said to the waves, "Quiet," or peace, "be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. And he said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" And they were terrified, and they asked each other, "Who is this? Who is this that even the wind and the waves obey him?" A couple things just to kind of get us going, some lessons and some thoughts. I think first of all, Jesus puts a finger on something here that I don't want us to miss. It's something that got talked about during COVID a little bit, but I just want us to kind of zero back in on this. As the disciples are totally freaking out and they're terrified and they are fearful and they are anxious, Jesus points out something. He points out that oftentimes our fear problems are often faith problems. Why are you so afraid, Jesus says? Do you still have no faith? I wonder if the Lord ever says that to us. Not in a condemning way, don't read it that way, but in an invitational sort of way. I wonder if he ever looks at us and says, "Why are you so afraid about the economy or about your job? Why are you freaking out about politics? Why are you depressed over the state of whatever, right? Your marriage or your family, or why are you frantic about the economy or whatever? Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" I don't think Jesus is minimizing those fears or those realities, but I think what he's getting at here is, where is your eyes? Where are your eyes at? Who or what are you trusting in? Why is it that Jesus could sleep peacefully in the midst of a terrible storm? Here's what I think it is. I think it's because he knows who he is, right? I think he knows that with a word, he can silence any storm. He knows who is Lord over the wind and the waves. He knows who can walk on water. And even if their worst fears are realized and they die, he knows who is Lord over life, but also who is Lord over death. He's the one that said, "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even though they die." Right? I mean, he's the one that walks on water. He is life. There is nothing too big for him, nothing too hard for him. While we may be powerless, he is filled with power. He literally spoke and the world came into existence. Therefore, he can sleep and be at peace in the boat, even with the storm raging around him. Even when the world is freaking out, he can sleep and be at peace because he knows who he is. He knows who the Father is. He knows the power that is available and who it is that is in the boat. And here's the thing, and we can know that kind of peace too when we remember who it is that's in the boat with us. He is present. He's powerful. He cares about his disciples, but he cares about us too. Therefore, there is nothing to fear. Friends, God is never surprised by the storms that come in our lives. He's never overwhelmed by them. He's never unable to help. He's a big God. And those that look to him, those that trust in him, that call out to him and continually rest and look to him, they can know peace. And they can be comforted by his presence no matter the circumstance. We can trust him when things are going well and when they are not, when there are storms in life. I've shared before, but I always think of, there's this great story about Stonewall Jackson, who kind of received that nickname in the Battle of Bull Run when Confederate soldiers that were fleeing, that were withdrawing, were inspired by him sitting high on his horse and continuing to march forward, even though cannonballs and bullets are zipping past him. In fact, the story goes, I don't know if it's true, but there's actually bullet holes in his jacket, and he is unflinching, right? Continues to charge forward. I mean, it's an incredible story. He was asked about it afterwards, and this is the quote. He said, "The quality of my religious beliefs teach me to feel as safe in battle as I do in bed." He said, "God has fixed the time of my death. I don't concern myself about that, but to always be ready, no matter when it may overtake me." And he goes on and says, "That's the way all men should live. If all men live that way, then all men would be equally brave." That's the quote. And I'm like, there's something great about that. He's like, you know what I'm convinced of? What he's basically saying is, I'm convinced that there is a God who is on the throne. The God who is in my boat or maybe on my horse with me, he's the one that's in charge of all. right? He's the sovereign one. He holds all power. He knows and has ordained the time of my death. I have nothing to fear. He's Lord over death. He's Lord over life and everything in between, right? On to eternity. I have nothing to fear. So Jesus is saying, there's a faith issue going on here. There is a big God in the midst of your life. He is present. He's available. He's powerful. And He wants you to know His presence and His power in your life, no matter what's happening. He's constantly trying to lift our eyes so that we can see and recognize His presence with us. He is in the boat with you. I think the problem is for us, and it's for the disciples too, is that we've put our faith and our trust in the wrong kinds of things. We put our faith and trust in ourselves, in our own ability, or in our jobs, or our career path, or our money, or our stuff, or our health, or the government, or whatever. But storms have a way of showing that our own strength will fail us. Storms have a way of revealing how small we really are. If our faith is set on anything other than a big and powerful God, we'll likely live with fear and anxiety and exhaustion most of our lives. Third thing I'm just going to hit real quick is I think this is great. Every time we feel overwhelmed at the storm, it's an invitation to refocus on Jesus and who He really is. Frantic fear is an invitation to refocus on Jesus. When we feel that going on, it's Jesus saying, come and look towards me. Come and put your faith and your hope at me. In me. At this point in the story, the disciples start asking the right question. It's sort of in the wrong way, but they start asking, who is this guy, right? Even the wind and the waves obey Him. Who is this man? Well, who can command the wind and the waves and they obey Him? They start asking the right kinds of questions. For the first time in their story, the disciples turn their attention to the right person. And they're dumbfounded, right? They are blown away that Jesus could actually step into the midst of the storm and calm it with simply His words, which explains probably why they have no peace. But Jesus speaks it nonetheless. He says, peace, be still, and it's quiet. All is at rest. And the disciples look at Him and say, who is this person that even the wind and the waves obey Him? Now they're asking a rhetorical question. Do they know the answer? Kinda, right? I mean, that's what I like about it. I mean, they're like, yeah, we know the answer. Who is this? They're saying He's the Messiah, right? He's the Savior. He's God's Son. But they're still not completely convinced. There's faith and doubt all at the same time. It's one thing to know the Sunday school answer. Can Jesus do it? Yes, right? I mean, we can kind of all say that. It's another thing to experience it in the midst of the storm, to see Him speak and bust into our worlds. And work in ways that are just jaw-dropping. There's a second story that I want us to look at. I told you there's three. There's a second story I want us to take some time on. This comes after the one that we just read, after Jesus calming the wind and the waves. A little while later, Jesus feeds 5,000 people, and then at the end of that, He needs to get away and spend some time alone with the Father, praying and seeking Him. And so the Bible says, He sends His disciples to go in the boat to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. He sent them on this trip and into this storm. Again, a storm comes up, and the boat has been out there for hours. They're rowing, and they're doing everything they can, yet they're not moving. They are stuck, and they are being buffeted by waves and wind. And after hours of this, Jesus comes to them walking on the water. Let's pick it up in verse 25. It says this, shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the water, on the lake. When the disciples saw Him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and they cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid. Lord, if it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. Now, I think this is interesting because it's sort of like Peter saying, no, I know this one. I know I've seen and I've experienced that even the wind and the waves obey you. So Lord, if it's you, I know that even the sea will obey. So if you tell me to come to you on the water, I know it will be done. So there's an element of faith and so He says, tell me to come to you in the water and it'll work. Verse 29, come, Jesus says. And so Peter gets down out of the boat, he walks on water, and he comes towards Jesus. Had to be a great moment, parenthetically, don't you think? Can you imagine putting yourself in the, walking on the water towards Jesus? Verse 30, but when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and he caught him. You have little faith, he said. Why did you doubt? And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. And then those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, truly you are the Son of God. There's a lot that I like about this passage as well. I like that Peter both has faith in Jesus, like, Lord, you're Lord over the waves, so tell me to come to you and it'll happen. I love that there's faith, but I also like that he gets overwhelmed by the waves and Jesus is merciful to him. Jesus, it says, when he starts to sink and he cries out, Jesus immediately, he says, reached out his hand, he catches him, walks him, puts his feet back in the boat on solid ground, lifts his eyes and reminds him to put his hope and his faith in Jesus. It's encouraging because I think I'm kind of like that too, and I bet you are too. I think sometimes it's easy for us to know, sure, Jesus is the Savior. I think it's easy to know and to say, yes, of course he can save me. He's the healer. He's the provider. He's the whatever. Yes, of course he can. But again, it's different when the waves are coming and the storm. We may have even seen him come through in the past, but when we get in the middle of the storm or in the middle of the waves and the wind and all this kind of stuff, we can lose our focus on Jesus. We can get overwhelmed by the other stuff and we can feel like we're sinking. We can get afraid. And I think it's in those moments it's comforting to read this story as well and remember that a merciful Savior can reach out his hand immediately and catch us and restore us and refocus our eyes on him again and again and remember who he is. But there's something else I want you to see here. In fact, I'm going to throw in the third kind of passage now, and I just want you to look at the responses in each of these because I think this is important in understanding these as well. Third thing we're going to look at is, third interaction is with when Jesus calls Simon Peter, and it happens in a boat as well. He calls him to be his disciple. Peter and his brother have been out fishing all night. They're professional fishermen, and they'd gotten skunked. They'd been out where they worked the whole night long and gotten zero fish, not a one. And so they pull up. I mean, they have nothing to sell. They have nothing to feed their families that day. There's nothing. And so they pull their boats up on the land, and they're cleaning their nets and that kind of stuff. Suddenly, Jesus steps into his boat and says, I want you to throw out your nets again. Put your nets down for a catch. And Peter's like, dude, we've been working all night and we have caught nothing. And eventually he says, but because you say, since you say so, I'll do it. And they throw out their nets, and when they do, they catch so many fish that the nets begin to break and the boats begin to swamp, and they have to call another boat to come to haul in all these fish that they catch. And I want you to look at Peter's response to this. This is, the first basic interaction that we have recorded between Jesus and Peter. It says this, so after this miraculous catch, when Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and he says, go away from me, Lord. I'm a sinful man. For he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish that they had taken. That's his first response is, I'm sinful. You can't use me. Go away from me, Lord. I am a sinful man. You're holy and I'm not. You have power and I don't. Go away from me. That's his first response. And then the next kind of subsequent response is the storm, and Jesus is asleep in the boat, right? Lord, don't you care if we drown? And Jesus speaks and calms the storm. Peace, be still. What's their response there? Verse 41 of Mark chapter 4 says this. It says, they were terrified, and they asked each other, who is this that even the wind and the waves obey him? And then the third one, right, that we've already read, when Jesus is walking on the water, he calls Simon Peter to step out of the boat. He gets distracted by the waves. Jesus catches him, puts him back in the boat, and all is still. What's their response? 14:33, it says, then those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, truly you are the Son of God. I think it's interesting. I think sometimes we like life to be safe and comfortable and in our own little, we like it to be predictable. We don't like storms. We don't like stepping out of boats. We don't like pushing past our own comfort zones or our own limits, right? That's a lot of times we're like, I'm not so sure about that. And you start in these passages, you start to see the sequence. Jesus isn't ever calling them into a life that's safe and comfortable and in their comfort zone. He doesn't want them to know, oh man, I can handle anything that comes my way. That's not the lesson he's trying to teach them. He's trying to open their eyes to who he is. And so he works in Simon's life on the front end, and there's this miraculous catch, and Simon's like, go away from me. And then he works and he calms the storm. His disciples say, who is this? And then finally, right, the third time, Jesus walks to him on water. Peter comes out, starts to sink. He puts him back in the boat, and they worship him and says, you are the Son of God. Here's the thing. I think Jesus is trying to show himself to you. He's calling us to a life of faith outside our comfort zones, outside of the ordinary. He's trying to show us his power, his plans, his glory. And that doesn't happen when we're all safe and comfortable and everything's going our way. Sometimes he calls us into storms. He calls his disciples and says, I want you to take this boat. I want you to go out. He knew it was going to happen. He was sending them into a storm. But he's doing it so that he can show them his power, that he is Lord even over storms, right? He calls them, and knowing that he's going to walk on water and come and rescue them, come and work in their lives. He's showing himself to them again and again and again. He may be the one who sends us into the storms, but he's the same one that calms the storms. He's the same God that raises the dead. He's the same one who walks on water, and he is with you in it. Right? He's the one that is in your boat with you. Now, in all fairness, does he calm every storm? No. Does he take away the storms and make everything smooth sailing from that point forward? No. But he's with you in it. There's a story I've shared before, but I love it. It's my favorite one for this kind of thing. But it's from the Scottish theologian James Stewart. And he compares the question of suffering and why does God allow hard things and storms in our lives and darkness. He compares that to the scene at the end of Charles Dickens' classic book, The Tale of Two Cities. And in it, right, there's condemned prisoners that are being driven in carts to the guillotine in Paris during the French Revolution. And one of the carts carries two prisoners. One is a man who had lost his soul. He'd been lost and kind of made a wreck of his life, but later was redeemed by Jesus, right? Was restored and brought back home by his grace. And he was now headed for the guillotine because he forfeit his own life to save a friend. The second prisoner in this cart was a little girl. And she had seen the gentleness and the courage in this man's face in prison. And she said to him, if I ride with you, will you let me hold your hand? She said, I'm not afraid, but I am little and I am weak, and it would give me more courage. And so now as they rode together, her hand was in his. And even when they reached the place of execution, there was no fear at all in her eyes, he says. And she looked into the quiet and composed face of the man beside her, and she said these words. She said, I think you were sent to me by heaven. Stewart goes on and says, what's the answer to the mystery of suffering and where is God when it's hard and all that kind of stuff? He said it's not an explanation, but it's a reinforcing presence. It's Jesus Christ to stand beside you through the darkness, to hold your hand in it. It's his companionship to make the dark experience sacred. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. He said, I know Jesus was sent to be with me from heaven. Do a little application. I think some of us maybe might be in the midst of a storm right now, might be experiencing some storms in our lives these days. Maybe it's been going on for a long time, or maybe just a furious squall that's come up. It could be health related. Maybe you've gotten a bad report from the doctor, or it could be financial, and you don't know how you're going to make it. Maybe you lost a job, or maybe there's a storm in your marriage and you just feel like you're sinking and you're going to drown. Whatever it is, the storm that is swirling around you, and you might be tempted to ask, Jesus, don't you care if we drown? It's scary. right? And your eyes have gotten drawn to the problems and to the storm, and they've gotten bigger and bigger and bigger feeling, and it feels hopeless. And I wonder if this morning, if Jesus isn't saying to you, not in a condemning way, but in an invitational way, where is your faith? Where are you putting your hope and your trust? Would you lift your eyes, friends? Remember who it is that's in the boat with you. The minute you and I call out, save me or catch me, let me see you. The God who calms storms, who heals the sick, who raises the dead, who speaks and the wind and the waves obey him. He makes his presence known even in the storm. And I think that's sort of the purpose. He's trying to open our eyes to who he is and what he can do. And as we learn to trust to him, as we learn to look to him and to cry out for him, we can come to know more and more peace and calm, even in the midst of the storms. Maybe you've seen him work before in your life and you've trusted in him so many times in the past, but maybe he's calling you in a fresh way. He's calling you out of your comfort zone, out of your boat and onto the water. And maybe you're afraid to take the step, kind of paralyzed by fear, and you're running worst case scenarios in your head. But friends, the life of Jesus is never about one of safety and comfort. There are storms and wind and waves out there no matter where you go, no matter what happens, and nothing you can do will stop it. But the one who is calling to you is the same one that walks on water. He's merciful and he catches us when we start to sink. He can calm any storm, and he's faithful and good. Not always predictable, right? Not always safe in the way we tend to think, but always good and always loving. He wants to reveal himself to you, help you and I to know more and more of who he is. And he is calling to us to step out and follow him where he leads. Maybe some of us need to be a little more proactive to kind of keep our focus stayed on him. Maybe you're not a super disciplined person in terms of with your time in prayer, your time in God's book. And maybe this week, maybe you need to start a new habit of some sort. Maybe just kind of opening up his book every day just for a little bit and starting to read a chapter or two just to help you keep your eyes fixed on him, just so that our eyes don't drop to the wind and the waves and all the storms that are swirling and the waves that are crashing in on the boat. Maybe we need to put some practices in place to keep our eyes fixed on him, to remember who he is. If you don't know where to start, I always encourage people to start in one of the 4 biographies about Jesus, the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. Start there and read maybe just a chapter a day. And just as you do, just say, God, reveal yourself to me. Who are you, Jesus? I want to know you. Remember who it is that's with you in the boat. There's a place that, I'll just hit this one real quick as we wrap up. Isaiah 26:3, there's a place in the Old Testament which I think is just a cool verse. It says, you will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast because they trust in you. God will keep you in perfect peace. It's shalom, shalom, right? He will keep you in perfect peace. Those whose minds are fixed on you, God. That's literally what it means. Those who are trusting and whose attention is stayed on you because they trust in you. Those who learn to look to God, to rely on and trust him, to keep their focus and their gaze on him, will live in perfect peace and wholeness and contentment, it says. It's better than anything that this frantic and fearful world has to offer. Let's close in prayer. Father, I thank you that even in the midst of the craziness of our world, that you are present, that you are powerful, that you are a God that walks on water, a God who calms storms, a God who is present and comforting and with us no matter what's happening in our world or in our lives. I pray, God, that you'd teach us, that you would fix our eyes on you, that our minds would be stayed and fixed on who you are, on your presence and your power. That we don't have to be tossed back and forth by the wind and the waves. We don't have to live in fear. We don't have to be, locked down and locked up and frozen, but that we can just walk humbly with you. Would you teach us this week to follow? When we start to sink or when we doubt, God, may we be quick to turn back to you and just say, Lord, save us. Rescue us, hold us, grab our hand. I pray that you'd embolden us as you call us to follow. I pray that we would be willing to step out of the boat and follow where you lead. Not because we're confident in our skills, but because we're confident in you. And even when there's hard seasons and you don't come through the way that we want to, God, would you remind us of your presence with us? Would you fill us with your peace, knowing that you are working for the good of those who love you, for your glory and even for our good. We trust in you. We look to you. We put our hope in you. We pray these things in Jesus' name.